My name is Corinne Ashford. I'm 44 years old. Last Thursday evening, my mother sat across from me at her dining room table, the one my father built with his own hands the summer I turned 7, and she slid a typed letter across the oak surface like it was a restaurant check. The letter had one number on it. $190,000. Underneath the number, one sentence. This is what you owe this family. Pay it or you're dead to us. My younger brother Julian was sitting to her left. My older sister Vivian was standing behind her with her arms crossed. My stepfather Roger was in the kitchen doorway, whiskey in hand, watching like a man who'd already placed his bet. I looked at the letter. I looked at my mother. I looked at the three of them arranged around me like a tribunal that had already decided the verdict before I walked through the door. And then I did something none of them expected. I smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a broken one. The kind of smile that comes when you finally understand the game, every rule, every player, every move they thought you couldn't see. I folded the letter once, slid it into my purse, and said 6 words. My lawyer will be in touch. Then I stood up, pushed in my chair, and walked out of the house I grew up in for the last time. My mother called after me. She said my name the way she always says it when I don't do what she wants, like a warning shot fired across a dinner table. Corinne Marie. I kept walking. But before I tell you what happened after that night, before I tell you what my lawyer found in those numbers, and before I tell you what was waiting in the filing cabinet my father left behind, you need to understand how a girl from Ridgewood, New Jersey, who spent 19 years keeping her family's finances from collapsing, ended up with a bill for $190,000 and a mother who called it love. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. My father, Thomas Ashford, was an architect. Not the famous kind. The kind who designed schools and libraries and community centers in small towns that couldn't afford the big firms. He had a drafting table in the basement that smelled like cedar shavings and India ink. He worked until midnight most nights, and when I'd sneak downstairs in my pajamas, he'd let me sit on his lap and watch his pencil move across the paper. He'd say, "Every line matters, Corinne. You take away one, the whole thing falls." He died when I was 25. Heart attack. No warning, no slow decline, no time to prepare. One Tuesday morning he was eating oatmeal at the kitchen counter, and by Tuesday afternoon he was gone. The paramedics said it was massive. The doctor at St. Catherine's said it was instantaneous. My mother said it was God's plan. I said nothing because the person I would have talked to about it was the person who'd just died. My mother, Lorraine, had never worked. Not because she couldn't, she had a degree in art history from Montclair State, but because my father earned enough and because Lorraine believed, truly believed, that her job was to manage the household. By manage, she meant delegate. She delegated the bills to my father. She delegated the cooking to a rotation of takeout menus. She delegated the emotional labor to me, starting when I was about 14 and she decided I was old enough to be her confidant. That meant sitting in her bedroom while she talked about how underappreciated she was. How my father worked too much. How Vivian was ungrateful. How Julian needed more attention. And how I, her middle child, her steady one, was the only person in this family who truly understood her. I didn't understand her. I just didn't argue. My father left behind a $380,000 life insurance policy, a house that was almost paid off with $94,000 remaining on the mortgage, and about $40,000 in savings. He also left a will, drawn up by his attorney, Edward Calloway, that divided his estate equally among his 3 children after providing for Lorraine's immediate needs. Equal thirds. Clean. Simple. The kind of plan an architect would design. What he didn't leave behind was someone to enforce it. My mother remarried 14 months later. Roger DeMonte, 52 at the time, a semi-retired car dealership owner with a deep tan and a louder voice than the situation ever required. He moved into the house on Maple Court, took over the master bedroom, and within 6 months had installed a wet bar in the living room and replaced my father's drafting table with a pool table. Nobody asked my opinion. Nobody asked Vivian's or Julian's either, but at least they had the luxury of living elsewhere by then. Vivian was 28, married to a man named Craig who managed a sporting goods store in Morristown. Julian was 21 and living with roommates in Hoboken, working part-time at a brewery and full-time at being aimless. I was the one who stayed close. Not in the house. I'd moved out at 22 into a one-bedroom apartment 11 minutes away, but close enough that when my mother called, which was often, I could be there in the time it took to microwave a cup of tea. I became an accountant. Not because I loved numbers, though I did, but because I watched my father's financial life get picked apart in the months after his death, and I swore I would never let anyone do to me what disorganization did to his estate. I got my CPA at 27. By 30, I was a senior associate at Barwell & Crane, a mid-size firm that handled tax planning for small businesses and high-net-worth individuals. By 35, I was a partner. Not a flashy one. The kind who shows up early, stays late, and bills accurately. My salary at the time of the dinner table letter was $178,000 a year. I owned a 2-bedroom condo in Ridgewood that I'd bought at 32 with a 20% down payment and a 15-year mortgage. I had $310,000 in retirement accounts and another $95,000 in personal savings. Nobody in my family knew those numbers. They knew I was comfortable. They assumed comfortable meant available. Here's what I paid for over 19 years, and I know the amounts because I kept every receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check in a filing system I maintained with the same discipline I used for my clients. When my mother couldn't make the mortgage after my father died, I stepped in. I paid $2,200 a month for the first 14 months until Roger moved in and she claimed he'd take over. He didn't. He paid sporadically, missed 3 months in the first year alone, and each time, my mother called me. Not Roger. Not Vivian. Me. Over the course of 8 years, I paid $78,400 in mortgage supplements. When Julian dropped out of his second college attempt and needed what my mother called a fresh start, I co-signed a lease on his apartment in Jersey City and covered the first 6 months of rent. When he lost the job that was supposed to sustain him, I covered 3 more months. When he needed a car for his next job, I put $8,500 down on a used Honda. Total for Julian over 5 years, $47,200. When Vivian and Craig's first child was born, there were complications. The baby spent 11 days in the NICU. Insurance covered most of it, but the out-of-pocket portion was $14,600. Vivian asked me, not Lorraine, not Roger, not Craig's parents. She asked me because she knew I'd say yes without making her feel small. I wrote the check. I never mentioned it again. She never paid it back. She never offered. Then there were the smaller things, though calling them small feels dishonest when they add up the way they did. Lorraine's dental implants, $6,800. Roger's truck repair after he backed into a fire hydrant, $3,400. Julian's traffic fines that had gone to collections, $2,100. Vivian's daughter's private school deposit when the public school waitlist didn't come through, $4,500. Christmas gifts that my mother insisted I buy on behalf of the whole family because you're the one who can afford nice things, Corinne. Birthday dinners where the check always found its way to my side of the table. Holidays where I brought the wine, the flowers, the main dish, and the dessert while Vivian brought her appetite and Julian brought his girlfriend. Over 19 years, the total I'd spent on my family, documented in the filing cabinet of my home office with the same rigor I applied to corporate audits, was $214,000. I'd never added it up before that dinner. I hadn't needed to. I wasn't keeping score. I was keeping a family together, and I thought that's what the numbers were for. But the night my mother slid that letter across the table, the night she put a price tag on my membership in my own family, I went home and opened the filing cabinet for the first time in years. Not to look at what I'd given. To look at what I'd kept. And what I'd kept, what I'd stored without fully understanding why, turned out to be the most important thing my father ever left me. Let me tell you how the letter came to exist. 6 months before that dinner, my mother announced that she and Roger were selling the house on Maple Court. The market in Ridgewood had gone up significantly. The house my father built the addition on, the house where I learned to read in the sunroom and where Julian broke his arm falling off the porch railing, was now worth approximately $620,000. Roger wanted to downsize. He'd been talking about a condo in Myrtle Beach. Lorraine wanted warmth and a fresh start. The plan, as my mother described it over the phone in a voice that was already rehearsed, was to sell the house, pay off the remaining $31,000 on the mortgage, and use the proceeds to buy a 2-bedroom unit in South Carolina. What she didn't say, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Vivian and Julian had already been told they'd each receive $75,000 from the sale. Not as inheritance, not from a will, just as cash from my mother's generosity. The kind of generosity that only flows in one direction. Nobody told me about the $75,000 promises. Nobody told me about the Myrtle Beach plan in detail. I was told, sell the house, buy something smaller, it's time. And because I loved my mother, because I'd spent 19 years being the person who said yes without conditions, I said what I always said. Okay, Mom. Whatever you need. I helped. Of course I helped. I called a real estate agent I'd worked with professionally, a woman named Sandra Yoon, who sold the house in 18 days at $637,000. I coordinated the closing. I reviewed the paperwork. I flagged a title issue that would have cost them $11,000 if it hadn't been caught. I did all of this for free. I did it because I'm an accountant who happens to be someone's daughter, and I couldn't separate the two any more than my father could separate his love of design from the buildings he left behind. The house sold. The check cleared. And then something shifted. The calls slowed. Sunday dinners got postponed. Vivian stopped responding to my texts for days at a time. Julian, who never initiated contact anyway, went fully silent. I told myself it was the chaos of the move. I told myself they were busy. I told myself the same lie I'd been telling for 19 years, that their absence was circumstantial, not structural. Then I got the invitation. Not to a dinner. To an ambush. My mother called on a Wednesday in March. She said she wanted to have a family meeting. Those were her exact words. A family meeting about the future. She said it like she was calling a board session. She asked me to come Thursday evening at 7. She said Roger would grill steaks. She said Vivian and Julian would be there. She said it would be nice to all be together again. I brought a bottle of Barolo, the good one, the $42 bottle I usually saved for client dinners. I wore the navy blazer I'd bought in Milan the year I made partner. I was, in every visible way, a woman who had arrived. Not flashy. Not performative. Just settled in her own skin the way a building is settled on a foundation that was poured correctly. They were already seated when I walked in. That was the first sign. My mother never sat before her guests arrived. She liked the performance of welcoming, the door, the embrace, the choreography of being the matriarch. But tonight she was already at the head of the table, flanked by Vivian on her right and Julian on her left. Roger was in the kitchen doorway. Nobody stood up. Nobody came to the door. The table was set for 5, but it didn't feel like dinner. It felt like a deposition. We ate first. Small talk. Roger's steaks were overcooked. Vivian mentioned Craig's promotion. Julian talked about a podcast he was thinking of starting. Lorraine said something about the azaleas at the new condo. Nobody asked me a single question. Not about work, not about my life, not about anything. I was a guest in the chair I'd paid for, eating off the plates I'd bought for my mother's birthday 3 years ago, and nobody noticed I'd stopped talking entirely. After dessert, my mother folded her hands on the table. The gesture was so practiced I almost admired it. She looked at me the way a principal looks at a student who's been called to the office but doesn't yet know why. Corinne, we need to talk about the finances. I set my fork down. What finances? The family finances, Lorraine said. She pulled the letter from a folder under her placemat. A folder. She'd brought a folder. She slid the paper across the table. I looked at it. Typed, single-spaced, printed on white stock. The kind of paper that tries to look official. At the top, a heading. Ashford Family Financial Reconciliation. Below it, a list. Item 1. Percentage of house sale owed to Corinne based on mortgage contributions, $0. Reason, contributions were voluntary gifts, not investments. Item 2. Adjusted value of family support previously provided by Corinne, $24,000. Reason, most contributions were exaggerated or unverifiable. Item 3. Outstanding balance owed by Corinne to the family for shared resources, emotional labor, and disproportionate benefit from family name and professional connections, $190,000. I read it twice. The audacity of it wasn't in the number. It was in the framing. They hadn't just asked me for money. They'd rewritten 19 years of history to make me the debtor. I looked up. My mother's face was calm. Vivian's arms were crossed. Julian was looking at his phone. Roger sipped his whiskey. This is what you owe this family, my mother said. Pay it, or you're dead to us. The room was silent for 4 seconds. I counted. Then I did the only thing that made sense. I smiled. Because I finally understood something I should have seen years ago. I wasn't their daughter, their sister, their family. I was their account. And they'd just handed me the closing statement. My lawyer will be in touch. I picked up my purse, stood, and walked out into the cold March air. The door closed behind me with a sound that felt like the last page of a chapter I'd been reading too long. I sat in my car for 6 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't call Colleen, my best friend, though I would later that night. I didn't scream or slam the steering wheel. I just sat in the dark and breathed and let 19 years rearrange themselves in my mind like a spreadsheet that had finally been audited. Every payment. Every phone call. Every time I showed up and every time nobody noticed. It all made sense now. Not as love. As leverage. They hadn't been grateful. They'd been managing me. And the $190,000 letter wasn't a demand. It was a test. They expected me to fold the way I always had. To absorb it, negotiate it, maybe push back slightly before writing a smaller check just to keep the peace. Because that's what Corinne does. She argues a little, she sighs, and then she pays. Except this time, Corinne didn't pay. This time, Corinne called a lawyer. I drove home, unlocked my condo, set my keys on the counter, and opened my laptop. I didn't search for attorneys. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly who to call. Margaret Chen had been my firm's outside counsel for 6 years. She specialized in estate law, asset protection, and what she once described to me over lunch as the quiet violence families commit with money. She was 51, precise, unflappable, and had the kind of voice that made judges stop shuffling papers and pay attention. I texted her at 9:47 that night. Margaret, I need to see you. Family matter. Not a client. Me. Her reply came in under a minute. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. My office. Bring everything. I opened the filing cabinet in my home office. The bottom drawer, the one I hadn't fully sorted since my father died. Inside, stacked in manila folders with tabs I'd labeled in my own handwriting years ago, were 19 years of bank statements, canceled checks, receipts, wire transfer confirmations, and one folder I'd never opened. The tab was written in my father's hand. For Corinne. When she needs it. I'd seen it before. I'd touched it. I'd moved it from his old desk to my filing cabinet the week after his funeral. But I'd never opened it because I didn't think I needed it. I thought the family would hold. I thought the foundation was sound. I thought every line mattered and none of them could be taken away. I pulled the folder out, held it the way you hold something that might change the shape of your evening, and opened it. Inside the folder were 3 items. The first was a letter, handwritten on the yellow legal pad paper my father always used for personal notes. The ink was blue, his favorite, from the fountain pen he kept in his shirt pocket like a doctor keeps a stethoscope. The letter was dated 4 months before he died. It was addressed to me. Corinne, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Not with you. You've never been wrong about anything in your life except how much of yourself you're willing to give away. I'm writing this because I know your mother. I know what happens when the person holding the family together is also the person nobody thanks. And I know that one day, you're going to need proof that I saw what was happening, even if I didn't stop it while I was alive. Below this letter, you'll find 2 documents. The first is a ledger. Every dollar your mother and I borrowed, received, or were given during our marriage, including 3 loans from your maternal grandmother, Rose, totaling $126,000, that your mother told everyone were gifts. They were not gifts. They were loans, with repayment terms your mother signed and then ignored. Rose never collected because she loved her daughter. But the paperwork exists, and it's in this folder. The second document is a copy of my original will, the one I filed with Edward Calloway, and a note explaining that if your mother ever attempts to alter the terms or redirect the estate away from my children, Edward has instructions to intervene. You are the executor, Corinne. Not your mother. Not Roger. Not anyone else. I named you because you're the only person in this family who would do it right. I hope you never need this folder. But if you do, don't hesitate. You've given enough. Dad. I read the letter 3 times. The third time, my hands were shaking so hard the paper rattled against the desk like a window in a storm. I set it down, pressed my palms flat on the surface, and breathed until my heartbeat slowed enough that I could think clearly. Then I looked at the ledger. My father had documented everything. Dates, amounts, purposes. The 3 loans from my grandmother Rose, $42,000 in 2001 for the kitchen renovation, $38,000 in 2006 for Vivian's private school tuition, and $46,000 in 2009 for what my mother had described as household expenses, but what the ledger revealed was a personal spending account Lorraine had opened without my father's knowledge. Each loan had a repayment schedule attached. Each repayment schedule had my mother's signature. None of them had been repaid. My grandmother Rose died in 2014. She never collected a penny. And my mother had told everyone, including Vivian, Julian, and me, that those loans were gifts. Generous gifts from a generous woman who wanted nothing in return. The lie was so clean it had become family history. But my father had kept the truth in a manila folder with my name on it, tucked into a filing cabinet like a seed planted for a season he knew was coming but hoped never would. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my desk with the folder open, the letter on one side and the ledger on the other, and I went through my own records. Every check I'd written. Every transfer I'd made. Every receipt I'd saved out of professional habit, not knowing that someday the habit would become armor. By 5 a.m., I had a complete accounting. My contributions to the family over 19 years, $214,000. My mother's unpaid loans from grandmother Rose, $126,000. The amount my mother had just demanded from me, $190,000. The math wasn't just insulting. It was fiction. My mother owed more than she was demanding, and she'd built her demand on the claim that my contributions were exaggerated or unverifiable. But I had verified every single dollar. Because that's what accountants do. I showered, dressed in the charcoal suit I wore for depositions, and drove to Margaret Chen's office at 7:45. She was already there. 2 coffees on the desk, legal pad open, reading glasses perched on her nose. I set the folder in front of her. She read the letter first. Then the ledger. Then the loan documents with my mother's signature. Then she looked at me over her glasses the way people look at you when they're deciding how much truth you can handle at once. Your father was a very careful man. He was an architect. Every line matters. Margaret set the documents down and folded her hands. Here's where you stand, Corinne. First, the demand letter your family gave you has no legal basis. 0. It's not a contract. It's not a court filing. It's a piece of paper with a number on it and a thread attached. It has the legal weight of a grocery list. Second, your contributions over 19 years are extensively documented. If anyone tries to claim those contributions were exaggerated, your records will dismantle that argument in about 4 minutes. Third, these loan documents from your grandmother are enforceable obligations that were never satisfied. Your mother signed repayment terms and defaulted. If the estate of Rose Callahan were to pursue collection, the balance plus interest over 15 years would exceed $180,000. She paused, let that number hang in the air. Your mother demanded $190,000 from you. She owes roughly the same amount to a dead woman whose estate was never properly settled. I stared at her. Are you saying I could countersue? I'm saying you don't need to. I'm saying the threat alone, the documented existence of these obligations, changes the entire dynamic. Your family wrote you a fiction. You're holding the audit. She picked up her coffee. There's one more thing. Your father named you executor of his will. Did you know that? I shook my head. My mother told me Edward Calloway handled everything after the funeral. I never saw the original documents. Margaret made a note. I'll contact Calloway this week. If the will was executed as your father intended, the estate division should have been equal thirds. If your mother altered the distribution or failed to execute the will properly, that's a separate issue. And it's one that doesn't have a statute of limitations when fraud is involved. I left Margaret's office at 9:30 and drove to work. I sat through 2 client meetings and a staff lunch without tasting a single bite of the catered sandwich on my desk. My phone had 7 missed calls. 3 from Lorraine. 2 from Vivian. 2 from Julian. I didn't return any of them. At 4 p.m., Vivian sent a text. Mom says you walked out last night. She's really hurt. You need to call her. I read it, set the phone face down, and finished my workday. That evening, my best friend Nadia came over. She'd been my closest friend since grad school, the kind of person who brings food when you're sad and honesty when you're wrong. She sat on my kitchen counter with a glass of wine and listened to everything. The letter, the dinner, the folder, Margaret's assessment. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. You know this isn't just about money, right? I looked at her. They literally handed me a bill for $190,000. I know. But the bill isn't the wound. The wound is that they looked at 19 years of you carrying them and decided you still owed more. The bill is just the receipt for how little they think of you. She was right. And hearing it out loud made the thing I'd been avoiding all day finally land. I wasn't angry about the money. I was grieving the family I thought I had. The one where my sacrifices meant something. The one where being the reliable one was honored, not invoiced. That family had never existed. The letter just made it official. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure campaign began. Lorraine called daily. Sometimes sweet, sometimes sharp, always circling back to the same point. We need to resolve this as a family, Corinne. That was her phrase. As a family. As if the word itself was a leash she could pull whenever I wandered too far from the arrangement. Vivian's approach was different. She went public. Not on social media, nothing that obvious, but in the way small-town families broadcast their narratives, through whispers at school pickup, comments at book club, carefully placed sighs at the salon. The story she told was simple. Corinne is punishing Mom for asking a reasonable question about shared family expenses. She's always been controlling about money. She uses it as power. Craig told a mutual friend. Vivian's words. The friend told Nadia. Nadia told me. And the version of me in Vivian's story, the controlling, power-hungry sister who weaponized money, bore no resemblance to the woman who'd written a $14,600 check for Vivian's baby without blinking. Julian did nothing. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't defend me or attack me. He simply disappeared into the same comfortable silence he'd occupied for most of his adult life, the silence of a man who lets other people fight the wars he benefits from. Roger sent one text. "You're tearing this family apart." I deleted it without replying. A man who replaced my father's drafting table with a pool table had no standing in this conversation. Margaret worked quickly. Within a week, she'd contacted Edward Calloway. Edward, now 74 and semi-retired, remembered my father clearly. He confirmed what I'd suspected. Thomas Ashford's original will named Corinne Ashford as executor and divided the estate in equal thirds among the 3 children, with a life-use provision for Lorraine on the family home, meaning she could live there but not sell it without the executors, which meant my written consent. My mother had never told me any of this. After my father's funeral, she'd told me that Edward had handled everything, that the estate was simple, that the house and insurance money were hers to manage. I believed her because she was my mother and because I was 25 and drowning in grief and because I didn't yet understand that the people who are supposed to protect you are sometimes the ones you need protection from. Edward sent Margaret the original documents by courier. The will was clear. The life-use provision was explicit. And the sale of the house on Maple Court, the $637,000 sale that I had personally facilitated, had required my written consent as executor. Consent that was never requested because I was never told I had the authority to give or withhold it. Margaret called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk reviewing a client's quarterly filing. Her voice was measured, but there was something underneath it, a current of energy she usually reserved for cases she found personally satisfying. "Corinne, the house sale may have been executed improperly. Your consent as executor was required under the terms of the will. It wasn't obtained. That doesn't necessarily void the sale, the buyers are protected, but it does mean your mother disposed of an asset she didn't have unilateral authority over. Combined with the undisclosed loans from your grandmother and the fraudulent demand letter, you have a substantial claim." How substantial? Substantial enough that if your family wants to have a conversation about who owes whom, they should bring a much bigger table. I asked her to prepare everything. A formal response to the $190,000 letter. A detailed accounting of my 19 years of contributions. A summary of the undisclosed loans from Grandmother Rose. A legal memorandum on the executor issue and the improper house sale. And one more thing, a cease and desist letter requesting that all 3 family members stop the defamatory narrative Vivian had been circulating. Margaret had it ready in 9 days. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The letters went out on a Friday. Certified mail, return receipt, Margaret's firm name embossed on the envelope in silver. Each letter was identical. 7 pages. Every page footnoted. Every claim sourced. Lorraine opened hers Saturday morning. I know this because Aunt Helen, my father's sister, called me that afternoon. Helen lived in Montclair, 20 minutes from Ridgewood, and maintained the kind of quiet surveillance network that only works in families where trust has been replaced by vigilance. Helen had heard from a neighbor of Lorraine's that there'd been screaming inside the house on Saturday morning. Not arguing. Screaming. The neighbor said it lasted 11 minutes. Roger's truck left the driveway shortly after. He went to the liquor store. He came back with 2 bags. Vivian opened hers Monday. Craig called Margaret's office that afternoon. He identified himself as Vivian's husband and asked to discuss the contents of the letter. Margaret's paralegal informed him that the letter was addressed to Vivian Ashford Brennan, that it was a legal communication between counsel and an identified party, and that if Vivian wished to respond, she was welcome to retain her own attorney. Craig said one sentence before hanging up. "This is going to tear the family apart." Margaret's paralegal noted the call in the file. Under the notes column, she wrote, "Family already torn. Client documenting existing damage." Julian opened his on Tuesday. He read it in the parking lot of the brewery where he worked 3 shifts a week. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. Then he drove to Lorraine's house. What followed, I learned from Aunt Helen, who learned from the neighbor, who had by now become an unintentional but highly reliable field correspondent. Julian walked into the house, sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my mother had slid the $190,000 letter across to me, and asked one question. "Mom, did you really sign loan documents with Grandma Rose?" Lorraine's answer was immediate. "Those were gifts." Julian opened the letter Margaret had sent. He pointed to page 4, where copies of the signed loan agreements were reproduced in full. Lorraine's signature on each one, clear and unmistakable, next to repayment terms she'd never honored. "These don't look like gifts," he said. Lorraine snatched the letter from his hands. "That woman has poisoned you. She's poisoned all of you. She's using lawyers and paperwork to destroy this family because she can't stand not being in control." Julian sat quietly for a moment. Then he said something that surprised everyone, including himself. "She paid for my apartment, Mom. She paid for my car. She co-signed my lease. She never once made me feel bad about it. And you told me she was exaggerating." Lorraine didn't respond. Julian left. He didn't call me. He wasn't ready for that. But for the first time in his adult life, he'd done the math on his own, and the numbers didn't add up the way his mother had told him they would. 3 days after the letters arrived, Vivian hired an attorney. Patricia Good, a family law specialist in Morristown who charged $400 an hour and had a reputation for aggressive opening positions that softened considerably once the facts were established. Patricia reviewed Margaret's letter, reviewed the loan documents, reviewed the executor issue, and called Vivian back within 48 hours. Her assessment, which Vivian later repeated to Aunt Helen in a voice that sounded like someone reading their own diagnosis, was 4 sentences long. "Your sister's documentation is thorough. The executor claim is viable. The loan obligations are enforceable. I'd recommend settling this quietly before it becomes a matter of public record." Vivian didn't settle. Not because she had a strategy, but because Lorraine wouldn't let her. My mother, who had spent 19 years treating my compliance as a natural resource, could not accept that the resource had been cut off. She called a family meeting. The second one. This time I was not invited. Lorraine, Roger, Vivian, Craig, and Julian sat in Lorraine's living room in the Myrtle Beach condo, the condo purchased with proceeds from a house sale I should have been consulted on, and discussed their options. Lorraine wanted to fight. She wanted to contest every claim in Margaret's letter, challenge the loan documents as forgeries, and file a counter-complaint accusing me of financial manipulation and elder abuse. Roger supported whatever Lorraine wanted because Roger had learned long ago that agreement was cheaper than argument. Vivian was torn. Craig told her the legal fees alone could exceed $30,000, and their savings were already thin after the NICU bills, which I had paid, and the private school deposit, which I had also paid. Julian said almost nothing. He sat on the couch and stared at the coffee table and occasionally looked at his phone like he was waiting for someone to text him the right answer. The meeting ended without consensus. Lorraine was angry. Roger was drunk. Vivian was frightened. Julian was absent in every way that mattered except physically. And I was 900 miles away, sitting on my own couch with my cat and a cup of tea, reading a book about Iceland that Nadia had given me for my birthday, the birthday nobody else remembered. My phone was silent. And for the first time in 19 years, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. The kind of space you only get when you stop filling it with other people's emergencies. I turned the page. The chapter was about glaciers, how they move so slowly you can't see it happening, but over time they reshape entire landscapes. I thought about that for a long time. The confrontation I didn't plan came 6 weeks after the letters. I was at the annual fundraiser for the Ridgewood Public Library, a Saturday evening event held in the renovated atrium of the old municipal building. Wine, cheese boards, a silent auction, and about 120 people dressed in the careful casual that passes for formal in a New Jersey suburb. I walked to the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The room behind me was doing what rooms do when the truth has been laid on the floor and nobody knows who should pick it up first. They were quiet. And in that quiet, my mother stood alone for the first time in her life without someone rushing to fill the space around her. The fallout was swift and structural. Patricia Good, Vivian's attorney, contacted Margaret the following Monday. Her tone had changed entirely from the initial aggressive posture to something closer to triage. She proposed a mediated settlement. No court filing, no public record, no further escalation. Margaret called me that evening. They want to settle, Corinne. Vivian's attorney is recommending that your mother formally acknowledge the loan obligations, that the executor issue be resolved through a retroactive consent filing, and that the $190,000 demand be withdrawn in writing. What do they want from me? They want you to agree not to pursue collection on the Rose loans and not to file a formal complaint regarding the house sale. I thought about it for exactly one evening. I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and looked at the lights of Ridgewood below me and thought about my grandmother Rose, who lent money to her daughter out of love and never got a dollar back. I thought about my father, who put a folder in a filing cabinet because he knew his daughter would need it someday. I thought about 19 years of checks written and dinners paid for and emergencies absorbed and birthdays forgotten. And then I called Margaret back. I'll agree to the settlement on one condition. The formal acknowledgement of the Rose loans must include a written letter from my mother, in her own words, confirming that the loans were not gifts and that grandmother Rose was never repaid. I don't need the money. I need the truth on paper. Margaret paused. That's going to be the hardest part for her. I know. The settlement took 3 weeks. Lorraine resisted the letter. She resisted it the way a person resists the one thing that costs them the most, not money, but the story they've been telling about themselves for 20 years. Vivian called me during the negotiations. The first time we'd spoken directly in over 2 months. She didn't open with an apology. She opened with a question. Did you really not know about the executor thing? I really didn't. Mom told me Edward handled everything. Vivian was quiet for a long time. She told me the same thing. I waited. Craig and I looked at our finances last week. Really looked. The NICU bill, Sophie's school deposit, you paid for all of it. And I let Mom tell me you were exaggerating. I'm sorry, Corinne. I didn't say I forgive you. Not because I was withholding it, but because forgiveness for something that large doesn't come in a single phone call. It comes in installments, like a loan repaid slowly, with interest that looks a lot like showing up. But I left the door open. Lorraine signed the letter on a Wednesday in May. Margaret sent me a scan. It was short, 2 paragraphs, written in my mother's handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed loan agreements she'd spent 20 years pretending didn't exist. The letter confirmed that Rose Callahan had provided 3 loans totaling $126,000, that the loans had repayment terms, and that those terms were never met. The last sentence read, I regret that I did not honor my mother's generosity with the honesty it deserved. I read it once. I filed it in the cabinet next to my father's folder. Then I closed the drawer. Julian called me the day after the settlement was finalized. I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce aisle, holding an avocado I wasn't sure was ripe. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I don't know how to say this without it sounding like an excuse. Then don't make an excuse. Just say what's true. I let Mom and Viv do all the thinking for me. About you, about money, about everything. I just went along with it because going along was easier than standing up. And you paid for my apartment and my car, and you never once made me feel like I owed you. And I repaid that by sitting at a table while Mom handed you a bill. I set the avocado down. I know, Julian. I know you were a coward. And I know it's easier to be a coward when someone else is doing the fighting. I heard him exhale. Can I buy you dinner? A long pause. I picked the avocado back up. It was ripe. Yeah. You can buy me dinner. That was a Tuesday in June. We ate at a Thai place in Hoboken. He paid. It was the first meal in 19 years that my brother had ever bought me. The food was mediocre. The gesture was not. I didn't reconcile with my mother. Not fully. Not the way stories are supposed to end, with a hug at a kitchen table and tears and a promise that everything will be different. Lorraine and I speak occasionally. Short calls. Surface level. She asks about work. I ask about the condo. Neither of us mentions the letter or the folder or the fundraiser. We talk around the wound the way you walk around a hole in a floor you both know is there. I don't think she'll ever fully understand what she did. Not because she's incapable, but because understanding would require her to see 19 years clearly, and some people would rather stay blurred. I accept that now. It took Dr. Adler, a therapist Nadia found for me, a woman with silver hair and a habit of letting silences stretch until they produced something honest, 7 months to help me accept that. But I accept it. Vivian and I are rebuilding. Slowly, carefully, the way you rebuild a structure after you've discovered the foundation wasn't what you thought. She calls on Sundays now. Not to ask for anything. Just to talk. She told me last month that Sophie, her daughter, the one whose NICU bill I paid, had drawn a picture of our family for school. She'd included me. Standing next to Vivian, holding Sophie's hand. Vivian sent me the photo. I framed it. It sits on my bookshelf next to the photograph of my father at his drafting table, pencil in hand, building something that was meant to last. Last month, I did something I'd been thinking about since the night I opened my father's folder. I contacted Edward Calloway and asked him to help me establish a charitable fund in my grandmother Rose's name. The Rose Callahan Education Fund. It provides tuition assistance to first-generation college students in Essex County. I seeded it with $126,000, the exact amount my mother never repaid. The money didn't come from anger. It came from the same place my grandmother's loans came from, love that deserved better than it got, directed somewhere it would actually be honored. Edward, who is 74 now and speaks even more slowly than he used to, looked at the paperwork and said something that made me set down my pen. Your father told me once that you were the line that held the whole drawing together. I think he was right. I drove home with the windows down. May air, warm and green, smelling like cut grass and the jasmine my neighbor planted last spring. I'd been on the library board for 3 years. It was the one community obligation I kept for myself, not for my mother, not for Vivian, not for anyone who needed a check written. I kept it because I loved books and because the library was the one place in Ridgewood that had never asked me for anything except my time. I was standing near the auction table, writing a bid on a weekend stay at a bed and breakfast in Cape May, when I felt the air shift the way it does when someone walks into a room carrying intention. I turned around. Lorraine was standing by the entrance in a cream blazer and pearl earrings, scanning the crowd with the precision of a woman who had come looking for exactly one person. Roger was behind her, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who'd been told he was going somewhere nice but hadn't been told why. And beside them, Vivian. I hadn't seen my mother since the night she slid the letter across the table. 7 weeks. The longest we'd gone without seeing each other since I was born. She spotted me. Her chin lifted. She crossed the room in a straight line, the way she moved when she wanted people to watch, and she stopped 3 feet from me, close enough that the women at the auction table turned to look. Corinne, we need to talk about this nonsense. Her voice was pitched to Carrie. Not shouting, Lorraine never shouted in public, but calibrated so that anyone within 15 feet could hear every word. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the room to see her confront her ungrateful daughter. She wanted the narrative to shift in real time, right there between the cheese boards and the silent auction. You've hired lawyers. You've sent threatening letters. You've turned your brother and sister against me. All because I asked you to contribute to this family the way any decent daughter would. I didn't move. I didn't step back. I didn't cross my arms or raise my voice. I held my wine glass at my side and looked at my mother the way I used to look at a client's books when the numbers didn't add up, steady, patient, waiting for the error to reveal itself. She kept going. Your father would be ashamed of you. He built this family. He would never have let a lawyer come between us. And now you're dragging your grandmother's name into it, twisting her generosity into some kind of debt. Rose gave us that money because she loved us. Because she loved me. That was the line. The one she shouldn't have said. Not because it was cruel, though it was, but because it was a lie told in a room full of people who were now paying very close attention. I set my wine glass on the auction table. I didn't rush. I took my time the way my father took his time with a drafting pencil, every line deliberate, every movement carrying the weight of what came next. Mom, Grandma Rose didn't give you that money. She lent it to you. 3 separate loans, $42,000, $38,000, and $46,000, with signed repayment agreements that you defaulted on. I have the documents. Your signature is on every one of them. The room contracted. I could feel it, the way conversations within earshot went quiet one by one, like candles being blown out along a hallway. Lorraine's face didn't change at first. She was too practiced for that. But her eyes did. Something behind them shifted from confidence to calculation, the look of a woman realizing she'd chosen the wrong battlefield. That's ridiculous. Those were gifts. They were loans, Mom. Dad documented everything. He kept a ledger. He kept the signed agreements. He kept them in a folder with my name on it because he knew this day would come. He just hoped it wouldn't. Vivian stepped forward. She'd been standing 2 feet behind Lorraine, arms crossed, jaw tight, playing the role she'd been assigned. The supportive daughter. The united front. But something in her posture had already started to break. Corinne, this isn't the place. You're right. It isn't. I didn't choose this room. She did. I looked at Lorraine. You came here tonight because you thought a public setting would make me fold the way I always have. You thought I'd be too embarrassed to say the truth out loud in front of people I respect. But I'm not embarrassed, Mom. I have nothing to be embarrassed about. Lorraine opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Roger shifted in the doorway. His hand went to his pocket, then to his chin, then back to his pocket. He had no script for this. He'd never needed one because I'd never stood still long enough to require one. I spent 19 years paying for this family, I said. Not because anyone asked, but because I thought that's what love looked like. $214,000 in documented contributions. I have every receipt, every bank statement, every canceled check. And when I asked for nothing in return, when I never once sent a bill or demanded repayment, you sat at a table and told me I owed you $190,000. You called it a family financial reconciliation. But it wasn't a reconciliation. It was an invoice for my loyalty. And you expected me to pay it because I always pay. A woman from the library board, Donna Whitfield, set down her auction paddle. She wasn't staring. She was listening. The way people listen when they realize they're hearing the truth and it's not comfortable and it's not going to stop. I reached into my bag. I hadn't planned to bring anything. I hadn't known my mother would be here. But the folder was in my bag because it had been in my bag every day since I opened it. Not as a weapon. As a compass. I pulled out one sheet. A single page. The first loan agreement, $42,000, dated March 2001. My grandmother Rose's handwriting at the top, my mother's signature at the bottom, and a repayment schedule that showed 20 years of zeros. I held it up. Not for the room. For my mother. This is Grandma Rose's handwriting. This is your signature. And this, I pointed to the column of empty payment lines, this is what you gave her back. Nothing. Lorraine's hand trembled. She reached for the paper. I pulled it back gently, not sharply, the way you pull something away from a child who might tear it. This document is with my attorney. Along with the other 2 loan agreements, my father's original will naming me as executor, and a legal memorandum documenting the fact that you sold the family home without my required consent. 1 sentence. That was all I had left to say. I'd rehearsed it once, in the bathroom mirror that morning, not knowing I'd need it tonight, and it came out exactly the way I'd practiced. Quiet, measured, and final. You didn't lose a daughter, Mom. You lost an accountant. And you didn't even know the difference. I picked up my wine glass. I took a sip. I turned to Donna Whitfield, who was still standing by the auction table with a look on her face that was somewhere between admiration and heartbreak. I think I'm going to win that Cape May weekend, I said. She almost smiled. Almost. I pulled into my parking spot, walked up to my condo, and stood for a moment on the balcony. The town was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels chosen. My name is Corinne Ashford. I'm 44 years old. I'm a CPA, a library board member, a sister who is learning to trust again, and a daughter who finally stopped paying for love that should have been free. I changed one number in a spreadsheet, the one that said I owed everything and deserved nothing, and it changed my entire life. I don't carry the folder in my bag anymore. I don't need to. The truth is filed. The loans are acknowledged. The fund is established. And the compass my father left me, the one that always pointed toward the people who needed me, I've learned to read it differently now. It points toward me, too. Last week, Nadia and I booked flights to Iceland. Glaciers, hot springs, a hotel with a glass ceiling so you can watch the northern lights while you fall asleep. I've never been to Iceland. I've never been anywhere that I chose purely because I wanted to go. I packed my bag last night. New boots, a journal, the cashmere scarf I bought myself for my birthday this year, the birthday I celebrated with Nadia and Julian, and a cake from the bakery on Elm Street that tasted like the first thing I'd ever done just for myself. I zipped the suitcase shut. My cat sat on the bed and watched me with the kind of calm judgment only cats are qualified to deliver. I scratched her chin. I turned off the light. And for the first time in 19 years, I fell asleep without wondering who would need me in the morning. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.